Imagine the sound of 30,000 pounds of pure, panicked horseflesh hitting a wall of human beings at 40 miles per hour. Now add the screaming. Not just from the men being turned into raspberry jam, but from the air itself. Above the thunder of hooves, there's this high-pitched, otherworldly hissing like 1,000 giant predatory birds are diving straight for your throat. You look up, through the sulfurous musket smoke. You see them, gold-plated giants with 10-foot wings sprouting from their backs, draped in the skins of leopards and tigers like some fever dream of a caffeinated monk. This isn't a parade. This is the last thing you will ever see. Welcome to the end. September 12th, 1683. Young. Empire has 150,000 men surrounding the city, and they're about 5 minutes away from turning Central Europe into a Turkish province. The Holy Roman Emperor. Leopold I, a man whose family tree was basically a vertical line, and whose ego was larger than his actual empire, is busy hiding in Pazzo. He's claiming he's the rightful heir to Rome because, apparently, he's descended from Noah. Bold claim for a guy currently losing his house. But then, over the ridge of the Kohlenberg Mountain, appears Jan III Sobieski and the Polish Lithuanian Husaria. Sobieski looks at the massive Ottoman camp, looks at his elite winged killers, and doesn't just order a charge, he launches an avalanche. 3,000 winged hussars lead a massive 20,000 man cavalry fist straight into the heart of the Grand Vizier's line. It is the largest cavalry charge in human history. It's loud, it's expensive, and it's deeply, deeply cool. Sobieski later sent a letter to the Pope, essentially trolling Julius Caesar by writing, "Okay, we saw God conquer." Translation, I did the work.
What is that?
But I'll give the big guy the credit so I don't get excommunicated. Here's the thing history books love to treat the winged hussars like a lucky fluke or a flamboyant TikTok trend that lasted 2 centuries. They weren't. They were the most scientifically engineered mailed fist of the early modern world. While the rest of Europe was getting obsessed with gunpowder and hiding behind spicy dirt mounds called fortifications, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth decided to double down on the one thing everyone said was dead: heavy shot cavalry. To understand how we got to the Angels of Death at Vienna, we have to go back to 1503. When the hussar was actually just a homeless Serbian mercenary with a wooden shield and a dream, the word gusar literally meant highwayman or pirate. These guys were the budget option light cavalry hired to harass the Ottomans because they were cheap and expendable. They were basically the we have cavalry at home version of an army. Then came Stephen Bathory, the 1570s. He looked at these light, scrap metal riders and thought, what if we made them terrifying? He stripped away the flimsy shields and replaced them with high-grade steel breastplates. He took away the light darts and gave them the copia, hollowed-out lance that was essentially a 20-foot-long kinetic missile. It was longer than an infantryman's pike, meaning a hussar could impale you before you could even think about poking his horse. Being a winged hussar wasn't a job. It was a ruinously expensive lifestyle choice. This wasn't a state-funded army. This was the szlachta, the Polish nobility flexing their bank accounts. If you wanted to be a Towarzysza companion, you had to pay for your own armor, your own leopard skins, and your own horses. And these weren't just any horses. They were a top-secret crossbreed of desert agility and European power. Exporting one was a capital offense. You'd literally get the death penalty for selling a horse to a foreigner. It's like if Ferrari had a death by firing squad clause in their sales contract. A single hussar's equipment could cost more than an entire village. The Polish motto was Zostasi, apostasi, which basically translates to go into massive debt. But make sure you look fabulous doing it. It was the 17th century equivalent of buying a private jet on a credit card just to show up your neighbor. But when that dead-tridden nobleman lowered his 20-foot lance and signaled his retainers to close ranks, the Darwinian necessity of the North European plain became very clear. You either had the most terrifying cavalry on earth, or you stopped existing as a country. Why the wings, though? Some historians used to say they were just for parades, which is the historical equivalent of saying a shark's teeth are just for aesthetic. Primary sources tell us the wings served 2 terrifying purposes. First, They protected the riders' back from the arconda, lassos favored by Tatar raiders. It's hard to rope a guy when he's wearing a giant wooden rack of eagle feathers. Second, and more importantly, the psychological X factor. Imagine 3,000 of these guys hitting a gallop, the feathers vibrating and hissing in the wind, looking like 10-foot-tall avenging angels. Most infantry didn't stand their ground to check if the feathers were aerodynamic. They just dropped their muskets and started praying. But the real secret wasn't the feathers, it was the physics of the charge. Most cavalry would ride up, fire a pistol, and run away. The hussars. They'd start wide to dodge your cannons, then, in the last 50 yards, they'd tighten the formation until their stirrups were touching, forming a literal wall of steel. At the Battle of Palanca, a single hussar lance was reported to have impaled 6 infantrymen in one go. That's not a weapon. That's a human kebab. The hussaria were the peak of a world where prestige was measured in blood and gold-studded harnesses. But as we'll see, when the world started moving toward professional, boring infantry and rapid-fire musketry, the angels found themselves flying straight into a storm. They couldn't outcharge. The problem with being a god-tier warrior is that eventually, everyone stops trying to fight you fairly. By the mid-1600s, the hussars weren't just a unit. They were a cheat code. At the Battle of Hadow in 1694, the Polish Thermopylae 400 of these guys were cornered by 40,000 Crimean Tatars. That is a 100-to-1 ratio. Most people would look at those odds and start updating their wills. The hussars. They ran out of bullets, so they literally picked up the Tatar arrows stuck in the ground and fired them back. They held their ground until the Tatars decided that 40,000 to 400 wasn't enough of an advantage and just left. But even a cheat code has a cooldown. The secret weapon wasn't just the wings. It was the horses. These animals were the result of a breeding program so elite it makes modern thoroughbreds look like donkeys. They could gallop for miles in full plate and then perform a 180-degree pivot at a full sprint. They were painted with red saffron to look like they were covered in the blood of their enemies. Because if you're already wearing eagle wings and a leopard skin, why stop at subtle? Image. Close-up of a hussar horse decorated with saffron and gold-studded harnesses. The downfall didn't come from a better warrior. It came from a better paycheck. The Schlachta nobility was literally bankrupting themselves to look cool. The Commonwealth was paralyzed by the liberum veto, a political rule where one grumpy noble could cancel an entire government meeting. It's like trying to run a country via a group chat where everyone has admin powers and one guy hates progress. While the Swedes and Russians were building professional, state-funded armies with rapid-fire muskets, the Polish nobles were still arguing about whose featherack was shinner. By the 1700s, the angels of death had become funeral soldiers. They only showed up to carry the coffins of kings, draped in gold and looking like relics of a better time. In 1776, the government finally pulled the plug, officially disbanding them. They went from the most feared shock cavalry in history to a ceremonial costume party in less than a century. The winged hussars were a beautiful, violent anomaly. They proved that for a brief, blood-soaked window in history. If you were brave enough, rich enough, and looked terrifying enough, you could actually outrun the future. They were the last gasp of the knightly ideal, wrapped in leopard skin and soaring on eagle wings.